Welcome into the Dynasty War Room. I'm your host, Andrew Valancourt, and this is episode 1 of the podcast, and we're kicking things off at an important point in the Dynasty fantasy football season, where managers are scouting the incoming rookie draft class and making moves to set their teams up for a successful offseason. Now, a little bit about myself before we talk rookies. I've been playing fantasy football for about 18 years, which is pretty crazy to think about. I'm a former sports journalist, and I'm now an attorney. And Dynasty Fantasy Football is my favorite format to play, so that's what this podcast will focus on. My goal is to have a new episode out each week and to provide you with some unique insight to help you put your team in the best possible situation to win a championship. Today we're going to dive into the 2024 rookie class, and I'm going to go through my very early top 24 rankings. I prefer to play in 12-team Superflex, PPR, and tight end premium leagues, and so that is how I have currently based my rankings. So we're going to go ahead and just jump right in. Let's start with number 1. Now, it's important, as I just said, this is Superflex. So to me, at this point, this has to be Caleb Williams, quarterback out of USC. Projected to be the number 1 overall pick. 6'1", 215 out of USC. He's 21.2 years old as of February 1st. We're recording this on February 4th, about a week before the Super Bowl. And Caleb Williams can really do it all from the quarterback position. He's kind of been the consensus number 1 prospect for a while now, since winning the Heisman Trophy as a sophomore. And there's a little bit of prospect fatigue. He didn't have as good of a season this past year, but he still was dynamic. You know, the name of the game for Caleb Williams is big plays. He's a playmaker. He can run the ball a little bit, but he can really extend plays and be creative when things break down in the pocket. Sometimes he tries to do a little bit too much, and that can get him in some trouble. But this is a guy that can throw the ball, he can run the ball. He's sort of everything you want in an NFL quarterback prospect in 2024. You know, this isn't 20 plus years ago where you're just focused on that pocket passer that can't move around. You need somebody that can move a little bit. And in terms of fantasy, you need to have a quarterback that has some sort of rushing upside. Now, Caleb Williams is not going to be Lamar Jackson. He's not going to be Jaden Daniels, who we're going to talk about in a little bit. But he can still run the ball, and he's going to be a dynamic passer as well. He threw for 30 touchdowns and just 5 interceptions this past year. And there's not a lot to critique him on. He certainly has some things. Obviously, we mentioned the regression from this past year and the fact that he does try to do too much on occasion. He could be a little bit taller. He has a bit of a slight build at only 6'1". And really, the only other thing that comes to mind for me is he does fumble a lot. He had 16 fumbles in 2023. That's an area that you certainly want him to clean up, particularly if he's going to be running the ball a little bit more at the next level. But I think there is an element here of, maybe he tried to do too much, just tried to one-up his previous season a little bit too much, and I think we saw that production dip because of that. Now we'll see where he ends up in the NFL. Chicago is the obvious potential landing spot as they currently hold the number 1 pick. Whether or not they keep that pick and decide to go with Justin Fields, we'll find that out in April. But regardless of whether he goes to Chicago or Washington or New England or whatever team makes the move to trade up, if the Bears do not keep that pick, to me, he's a slam dunk number 1 overall pick in a Superflex league. Now, at number 2, Marvin Harrison Jr., wide receiver from Ohio State, 6'4", 205 pounds. He's 21 years old. There's not a lot to say about Marvin Harrison Jr. Obviously, he's got the name, everybody knows, but it's not just the name here with Marvin Harrison Jr. He's an elite size, speed prospect. He's an elite route runner. He can make contested catches. He's got incredible production. It would have been nice if he got a handful more passes this year. He only had 67 compared to some of the other top prospects in this class. But still, 1,200 yards, 14 touchdowns, 89.6 PFF receiving grade. This is a guy that can do it all and should be a number 1 wide receiver in the NFL the minute he gets drafted. I mean, this is a guy that from a an overall dynasty ranking perspective, is probably a top 6 dynasty wide receiver the minute he's drafted. And you could even make the case that he could be a little bit higher than that. He's that good of a prospect. And there's really not a lot of negative things to say about him. He had a few drops this year, but other than that, he was a stud. He was great as a sophomore, early breakout age. He comes out as an underclassman, and he's pretty much everything you want in a wide receiver prospect. He's probably going to end up being drafted in the top 5. I do think that there is, we could see something where, depending on the landing spot, there's going to be a lot of people that try to push Marvin Harrison up above Caleb Williams if he goes to, say, the LA Chargers. You could even see with the Cardinals. I think that's actually a pretty good situation for him with Kyler Murray. They could use a big outside wide receiver. I think the worst destination would be if he goes to New England at number 3. I think they should probably be focusing on quarterback, but you never know with the Patriots if they do decide to go with the wide receiver route, because they absolutely could use a receiver. Marvin Harrison would be the obvious choice there, but either way, he's my number 2 overall prospect at this point, and I don't see that changing. I think he's locked and loaded. The only way that I could see taking Marvin Harrison over Caleb Williams is if you're in a situation where maybe it's an 8 or 10 team league, and you're just loaded at quarterback, and you've got a bunch of guys, and you're weaker at receiver. And maybe in that scenario, sure, you can go ahead and take Marvin Harrison. But in a standard 12-team Superflex league, quarterbacks are too valuable. And Marvin Harrison's going to be a great player in his own right, but there's a reason that quarterbacks are the first few picks off the board in a Superflex startup league. And so that is why I still have Marvin Harrison at number 2 and not at number 1. Now, with that being said, I'm going to change things up a little bit here at number 3. The consensus, I think, right now is more of the Drake May, Jaden Daniels. But for me, the number 3 prospect is Malik Neighbors out of LSU, the wide receiver. I think he's also somebody that's probably going to go top 5 or 6 in this draft. And he would be the number 1 prospect and the number 1 wide receiver in almost any other year. I mean, this guy is an elite wide receiver prospect coming out of wide receiver factory in LSU. 6 foot, 200 pounds. He's only 20 years old, and he had an incredible season at LSU this year. He had an early breakout age. He just has the numbers. He is an incredible separator, which to me is the most important thing to look for in these wide receivers as you go through the scouting process. And that's not to say that guys, that are not elite separators can't be good in the NFL. That's certainly not the case. But when you can separate at a really high level, I think that puts you in that elite tier that can become one of the top 5 wide receivers in the league. And to me, I think between Harrison and Neighbors, you got 2 elite separators, Neighbors in particular, and I think he's going to be a really, really good NFL wide receiver. He's 6 foot, 200. He's not, he doesn't have quite the size as some of the other receivers in this class, but it's still plenty big enough. He put up incredible numbers this season, 86 catches for over 1,500 yards and 14 touchdowns, 93.5 PFF grade, which again is not the end all be all, but when you have enough things that point out how good a player is, it's one of those things where they might just have a point. And I think Malik Neighbors is an obvious situation of that. 3.81 yards per route run, which is a pretty good predictive stat for receivers. That's even better than Marvin Harrison's, who's 3.44. But again, there's a debate here where if you are a quarterback needy team in Superflex, I have no issue taking Drake May or Jaden Daniels here in the 3rd spot. But to me, just in a vacuum, Malik Neighbors is the better prospect. I think he has a better chance of being a star in fantasy football. And it has nothing to do with how good a prospect Drake May or Jaden Daniels or Brock Bowers, any of these other players might be. I think it is just more about how good Malik Neighbors is in my mind. Now at number 4, though, I am going to go with Drake May, quarterback out of North Carolina. He's probably going to be the number 2 overall pick in this draft. I have a hard time seeing him falling below the 3rd pick unless we end up in a situation where, the Bears take Marvin Harrison or they, something weird happens in the draft. But Drake May, there might even be teams that have Drake May at number 1 on their draft board, but there also will be some that might have him at number 3 behind Jaden Daniels. So we'll see. But Drake May, to me, prototypical size for a quarterback, 6'4", 230 pounds. He's only 21 years old. He's got the size and the arm strength. He can move around. He's not just a pocket passer. He can run when he needs to. And he's a pretty aggressive player, which, at times can hurt him a little bit. He did have 9 interceptions this last year, which is more than the other top quarterback prospects in this draft, other than, Michael Penix, who had significantly more pass attempts. But, 3,600 yards, 24 touchdowns. He ran for almost 500 yards, 89.1 PFF grade. This is a good player, and teams are going to fall in love with the size and arm talent combination, and he's going to be a top 3 pick. And you get a quarterback in that top 3, and you have to value that in Superflex. This is a really good quarterback prospect. He's probably, he probably would have been the number 1 quarterback in last year's draft over Bryce Young. Obviously, in hindsight now, we all realize that C.J. Stroud was the move there. But as a prospect, Drake May is right up there. He had a bit of an underwhelming 2023 season. He's not the most accurate quarterback, and that could come back to haunt him. But I think teams are going to be enamored with this, big, strong, physical guy that they can mold into, a Justin Herbert type. I see that as kind of a comp for him. So we'll see what kind of situation he goes to. I think Washington's the early favorite for that, but I have Drake May at number 4 in my rankings. At number 5, I'm going to go with Brock Bowers, a tight end out of Georgia. He's projected to be a top 10 pick, and I think a lot of people listening might be surprised that I didn't go with Jaden Daniels in the spot, who we'll get to in a minute. I do have him at number 6. But to me, Brock Bowers is almost a unicorn of a prospect. He is extremely good. He had an elite 3 years of production at Georgia. He is a very good route runner. He can operate as that big slot receiver. He's got good speed. He can break tackles, great hands. This is an all-around elite tight end in every sense of the word. He's only 21 years old. He is coming off a bit of an injury. He missed the end of the year for Georgia, but he'll be ready for the start of the NFL season. And there's almost nothing bad that you can say about this guy. He might be a tad undersized, and we'll see throughout the draft process what his actual measurements come in. I'm not sure if that 6'4", 240 is going to stick, but this is a guy that is going to be an immediate impact player. And if he goes number 5 overall to the Chargers and Jim Harbaugh, who loves to throw to the tight end, that's going to be a great situation for him. I could see him going anywhere in that 4 to 15 range, 5 to 15 range. Really, he's not going to go to Arizona with Trey McBride, but that 5 to 15 range, it's going to be a good situation for Bowers. And again, we talked about elite production. He's got an elite yards per route run number 4 tight end at 2.65. And I'm going to be eager and excited to draft him in tight end premium Superflex leagues at this number 5 spot. And again, what about the importance of a quarterback in a Superflex league, and how can you possibly have Jaden Daniels behind Brock Bowers? And to me, again, it's not so much a knock on Jaden Daniels. It's Brock Bowers is that good, just as I think Malik Neighbors is that good, which is why I have him above Drake May. At number 6, however, I do have Jaden Daniels, and I think the biggest thing with Daniels is he might be kind of the biggest boom bust prospect in this top 6 or 7. I think there's really a clear tier break after the top 7, and we'll get there in a minute. But Jaden Daniels to me has an incredibly high ceiling, but also a low floor. And the reason he has that high ceiling is because of his rushing ability. This is a guy that is extremely fast. He's got incredible rushing ability. He ran over 1,100 yards this past season in his Heisman winning campaign, 10 touchdowns. He had a 92 PFF grade. And it wasn't just running the ball. This isn't just a running quarterback. He threw for 3,800 yards, 40 touchdowns, only 4 interceptions. He really took care of the ball well. Very few turnover-worthy plays, and that's something that's obviously of high importance at the quarterback position. And he throws a pretty good deep ball. This is a guy that has the tools to make it work in the NFL. And he also has the size, too, at 6'4", 210. But he does have a couple knocks, and this is where I do have him at 6, where, some people, there's going to be people that by the end of this process have Jayden Daniels as the number 2 prospect. And should he surprise and go even higher in the draft, there's going to be a lot of discussion around Jayden Daniels because I think he is a little bit of a polarizing prospect. He's 23 years old. He's a 5th-year senior. He had a really late breakout. This isn't a 20 or 21-year-old prospect that's coming out as a true junior. Jayden Daniels transferred to LSU from Arizona State, and we can't just entirely forget his time at Arizona State where he was just not that good. Not an NFL prospect, not somebody that was really on the radar. Even coming into this past season, he was not really thought of as, a top-level NFL prospect. This wasn't someone when the season started that people were going, oh yeah, this is, top 10, top 15. I'm not even sure that he was really thought of as a first or second round pick. This is somebody that rose because he had an incredible season, obviously winning the Heisman Trophy. But there is a little bit of risk here, and I tend to be a little bit risk averse as a dynasty player, especially when it comes to drafting these rookies where there is a big boom bust potential. Some people love to take the risk on those guys because the payoff is great. And Jayden Daniels, if he hits in fantasy football, probably becomes a top 5 quarterback in the NFL for fantasy football because of that rushing ability. However, I'm a little worried about that, 5th-year late breakout, putting it all together so late, competing, largely against players younger than him. And I'm a little worried. Now, that could change over time throughout the draft process. He's probably going to be the 3rd overall pick in the draft, going to go to the Patriots. I'm not sure that I trust their offensive staff and new coaching staff yet. It's a tall task replacing Bill Belichick, but we'll see how things shake out. But right now, he's my number 6 prospect, and I'm not sure that I'm going to have a ton of shares of him because I do think that most people have him a little bit higher than that at this point. At number 7, I have Rome Odunze, wide receiver out of Washington. I think he's also going to be a top 10 pick. 6'3", 215 pounds. He's only 21 years old. And Rome Odunze is just a flat-out good wide receiver. He makes good... he has great ball skills, makes a lot of contested catches, good hands, a big physical receiver, and he has elite production. He was really, really good this past season, and he was good the year before. He is coming out as a senior, but his freshman year was that COVID year where it was kind of a wash of a season. Washington did not play a full season, but this past season, 92 receptions, over 1,600 yards and 13 touchdowns, 2.93 yards per route run, 89.5 PFF grade. Some people are, split a bit on him as a prospect. I think they're a little worried about some of the limited route running. He doesn't have top-end elite speed, and again, he is not a true junior coming out of college. But this is a guy that was a stud. There's really no other way to put it. He was awesome this year for Washington. He and Michael Penix were an elite combo, and he struggled a little bit in the national title game against Michigan. But this is a guy that I think is locked in at number 7 in rookie drafts. I don't really see that changing. I'm not sure that he has the chance to rise above Jayden Daniels or Brock Bowers, Maybe if he goes a little earlier than expected or has a really elite landing spot, something is possible. But for now, until the draft happens, I have a hard time seeing myself moving off of Odunze in that number 7 slot. At number 8, somebody again that I think I have this guy a little bit higher than consensus at the moment, but that's because I believe he's going to be a mid-first round pick, and that's J.J. McCarthy, quarterback out of Michigan, 6'3", 202 pounds. He's only 21 years old, and this isn't somebody like the other 3 quarterbacks that we've talked about that had some explosive, college career with elite numbers. This is not somebody that lit up, the stat sheet with video game numbers like a Jaden Daniels or a Michael Penix or a Caleb Williams or any of these guys. But that's not what the Michigan offense required of him. It was a run-heavy offense. He managed the game a little bit more than you would like to see from, a first-round quarterback. But can you blame Michigan? Undefeated season, national champions, 3 consecutive years in the college football playoff with J.J. McCarthy. And I think because of his age and his tools, this is a guy that's going to end up creeping up on NFL draft boards. A lot of people right now think he's going to be more of a late first, early second. I really see him ending up in that mid-first range. I'd be surprised if he is not selected in the first round. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that he is coming out as a true junior. He can move, he can extend plays, he can run the ball. He can fit a ball into tight windows. And he played in a pro-style system. So while he didn't have video game numbers, this is a guy that, had good, solid production within the offense that he was playing in. 72% completion percentage, just under 3,000 yards, 22 touchdowns and only 4 interceptions. He ran for over 200 yards and a few touchdowns as well. Somebody's going to take the chance on developing him into being, a good starting quarterback. He does strike me as somebody that could fit into, a number of different systems, maybe Seattle or Denver. I think you could even see him go as high as Atlanta or Vegas. I'm not sure that I quite see that yet, but he's somebody that somebody's going to take a chance on, and that's the bottom line. He struggles with deep ball accuracy. It was not his best throw this past year, but he does have the arm. He can make the throw. It just wasn't something that we saw a lot of this past year playing in that run-heavy offense. And he had some inconsistent moments. There were a couple of games, Bowling Green in particular, and then a couple of moments late in the year where, he made some poor decisions, but largely speaking, J.J. McCarthy made the right move most of the time, and you obviously saw that with how successful Michigan was with him leading the way. Number 9, I'm going to go with Brian Thomas Jr., wide receiver out of LSU, another LSU wide receiver, 6'4", 205. He's 21 years old. I think he's going to get late first draft capital, and this is just a big size-speed combo guy. He's got good hands, good ball skills. He releases well, and he's definitely a deep threat. But this is a guy that maybe doesn't have quite as crisp of that route running. He's kind of a late bloomer. He didn't really do anything his first 2 years in college, but he broke out this year with Jaden Daniels during his big season. 68 catches, almost 1,200 yards receiving, and 17 touchdowns. 75.1 PFF grade, 2.61 yards per route run. One thing with Brian Thomas is, people are going to point to the 17 touchdowns and talk about how elite of a number that is, which is true. But touchdowns, are not a stat that is necessarily sticky. I prefer to give a little bit more, weight to those yards. I think that's something that's a little bit more, it shows you a little bit more about what kind of player he is. And, obviously having almost 1,200 yards, that's very, very good. But the 17 touchdowns does show that he is a red zone threat. I'm not going to expect him to jump into the NFL and immediately be a touchdown machine. But I think because of the size and speed, at 6'4", coming from a school like LSU that is known for producing elite wide receivers, I think there's going to be a team that takes a chance on him in the first round. I think you could even see a situation where he ends up in the late teens or early 20s after teams miss out on that top 3, cutting off with Rome Odunze. So Brian Thomas, to me, there's a very clear top 7 in tiers, but then I think from probably 8 to 11 or 12 is a very clear second tier, starting with J.J. McCarthy and then the next 3 receivers here at 9, 10, and 11, who are very difficult to distinguish, despite the fact that they are very different style of receivers. And so that brings me to number 10, Troy Franklin, a wide receiver from Oregon, who projects right now, I think, to have late first round draft capital. He's 6'3", 187 pounds, so he is a very slender guy. He has not turned 21 yet, though. And so, again, 20.9 years old as of the beginning of this month. And this is a guy that has the speed. He's a deep threat. He's got good ball skills. He's a young prospect. He releases well. And he played in that really strong Oregon offense this year. But there are a couple knocks. He does struggle with physical corners and just that physicality because he is, so slender. Just a thin guy in general. It'd be nice to see him put on a little bit of weight, maybe 10 or 15 pounds going into college or going into the NFL out of college. But we'll see. We have seen a trend in recent years of these wide receivers that can play at these smaller sizes and these lighter weights. So, we'll see. He's another guy that I'm going to be eager to pay attention to in the combine and the pre-draft process to see, where he moves. He had 81 catches, over 1,300 yards, 14 touchdowns, was a really, really productive player, 3.32 yards per route run, PFF grade of 87.3. He has struggled a little bit with drops. He had 9 drops this past season. So, again, not a perfect prospect to go along with the weight concerns, but he has some promise, and I could see him filling a role in the NFL. Number 11, I'm going to go with Keon Coleman, a wide receiver out of Florida State, who is also projected to be a late first-round pick. He's been a bit of a polarizing prospect because he is not exactly the best separator or route runner. This is not somebody that, falls under in the Malik Neighbors type of category. He's not that type of player. He is a highlight machine. He's got great size, 6'4", 215. He's 20 years old, and he's a great red zone wide receiver. He makes those highlight plays. He can high point the ball, has good, strong hands. But, again, it's sort of about what you value in a receiver. His production was not great this past season. He had 50 catches, 658 yards, but he did have 11 touchdowns. Really kind of a low yards per route run number, 1.74, and just a 70 PFF grade. So again, this is somebody that is not going to be the prospect for everyone, but it could be situation dependent. If I think he fits in an offense like Buffalo, where he gets to play with a guy like Josh Allen who, likes to throw a deep ball, I think that would be a good situation for him. But again, until we get to the draft and see where this guy lands, it's hard to project what kind of NFL receiver he's going to be. Somebody, again, that I think has some boom-bust potential. But when you're talking about the 11th pick, late in the first round, I think that's someone that you can take a risk on at this stage in the rookie draft. Number 12, I'm going to go with Michael Penix Jr., quarterback out of Washington, 6'3", 213. He is 23.7 years old, and that age is going to be of concern to NFL teams. He was a sixth-year player, struggled with injuries throughout his college time, particularly while he was in Indiana, where he was still a great quarterback. He was a very good college quarterback all 6 years. But again, you're talking, that's a long time in college. And by the time he truly, this year when he was a Heisman contender, sixth year of college football, playing against guys younger than him, I do worry a little bit about Michael Penix. But with that being said, this guy can throw the ball. He's got incredible arm talent. He avoids sacks. He had big-time production this year, almost 5,000 yards, 36 touchdowns. He did throw 11 interceptions. He's not really going to run the ball. He has some mobility, which is why he's able to avoid those sacks, but he primarily is a pure pocket passer at this point, a 90.5 PFF grade. One of my favorite players to watch in college football the last few years, really his entire career, and he's somebody that, depending on the situation, could end up being a very good NFL quarterback. But this is one of those things where if he is a second-round pick as opposed to a late first, that does affect his value in terms of a draft, in terms of a draft spot. So he's somebody I'll keep an eye on, see what kind of draft spot he gets. But for now, he slots in at number 12 in my rankings. And one thing, as we're going to move a little bit faster here through the second round, but I want to note these are very early rankings. Things are going to change as we get new information, as I watch more film. Very limited film has been watched on these guys by me at this point. And things will change. The combine always changes things. And then, of course, when a player is actually drafted, what team, the situation, their draft capital, that all will factor in to where these guys will end up. But these are just, it's an initial ranking of guys that you really should be paying attention to at this stage in the process moving forward. So as we kick off the second round, number 13, I have Xavier Worthy, wide receiver out of Texas. I think he's going to probably be a second-round pick, 6'1", 172. He's 20 years old, 20.8. He had a really early breakout age. He was a stud as a freshman. He has elite speed, good ball skills, a deep threat. But this is a guy that is very small. 172 is very, very light for an NFL wide receiver. And that worries me. His hands have come into question a bit. He does have some drops. So that's something that, does worry me a little bit. You got to be able to catch the ball, obviously, if you're going to be a high-level NFL receiver. And he's not really a contested catch guy either. I think he's one of, he's a deep threat and somebody that is going to have to create separation with his speed to really be a good NFL receiver. He did have 1,000 yards and 5 touchdowns this past season. And so somebody to keep an eye on as well, but someone that could move up or down in these rankings as the process moves along. Number 14, I have Bo Nix, quarterback out of Oregon. He's probably going to be a second-round pick as well. I'm not sure that I see him sneaking into the first round, but of course, if he does, he would move up in these rankings. 6'2", 217. He's almost 24 years old. Again, we talked about with Michael Penix and Jaden Daniels, the age is a concern for me. He's, a fifth-year guy, threw a lot of screen passes that kind of, bumped up those numbers. But he does have some arm talent. He can move around. He can run. He's an accurate passer. And, he had put up 4,500 yards and 45 touchdowns with only 3 interceptions this past year. Over 200 yards rushing, 6 more touchdowns, 77% completion percentage, which is very, very good. So the stats are there. It's just one of those things where I'm not sure he's going to be drafted high enough to be worth a first-round pick in your rookie draft. But if he goes to a good situation in the early second, I think he's perfectly fine being somebody that you take at that 1-2 turn somewhere in the early second, and that's where I currently have him at number 14. Now, at number 15, we're going to get into the running backs finally, which is a little rare. You would think at this point you'd have some running backs in the mix. But at number 15, and my running back 1 as of right now is Jonathan Brooks from Texas, 6 foot, 207 pounds. He's only 20 years old. I think he's probably going to be more of a late second, third round type of pick. Again, with these running backs this year, I have a handful coming up here in the second round, and it's really all over the place in terms of draft capital. There's no first round running back in this class. I don't think there's an early second round running back in this class. There might not be a second round running back, period, in this class. We might see a lot of third and fourth round picks at the running back position. But right now, Jonathan Brooks is at the top of the list for me. That age is a big factor, being only 20 years old. He's got good size. He had elite production this past year at Texas. He's a prototypical 3-down back, and he can catch the ball. So he's got everything you want in a prospect, but the downside is that he's coming off of a major injury that I think is going to severely limit his impact as a rookie. I think if you draft Jonathan Brooks, you probably need to be a team that can afford to not count on him for anything as a rookie. I think you're really talking about his second NFL year where he'll be an impactful player, because players coming off knee injuries just, they do struggle a little bit coming back, and it's going to be just a slow process to get him fully healthy and back to that type of player that you would expect a running back one in a class to be. He broke out a little bit late. His third year at Texas was really his best and only great season, but he did play behind Bijan Robinson, who obviously we all know what kind of prospect he was. But again, somebody to keep an eye on. I like him a lot. And he's kind of in the same tier here. From this point on, there's a lot of players in a very similar tier. So at 16, I'm going to go Trey Benson, running back from Florida State. Again, maybe a second-round pick, but probably looking at the third round. 6'1", 223. He's 21 years old. He's got good size. His age is still good. He's got great speed and pretty good production. But he didn't get the ball as often as I would like to see. He never topped 1,000 yards. He's not a big-time receiving threat. He ran for 900 yards this year and 14 touchdowns. He did catch the ball a decent amount. He did have 200 yards and 20 receptions. So it's not that he's not a pass-catching threat. But, again, it's something where I really would have liked to have seen Florida State use him more. And it's somebody that I'm going to have to dive into the tape a bit to see where he falls. But, again, with running backs, draft capital is critical. If Jonathan Brooks and Trey Benson and the running backs that I am about to talk about, if they're drafted on day 2, they're a smash pick in the second round for me. But again, if we're talking 4th round, 5th round, anything, day 3, you're getting into a situation where you're really taking a big swing on a guy that has a low likelihood of being an impact player in the NFL. So I would love to see second or third round draft capital for Brooks and Benson, along with a few of the running backs coming up, Braylon Allen, Blake Corum, Bucky Irvine. But we'll just have to see what the NFL thinks of these guys come April. Now, at number 17, my tight end 2 off the board is going to be Jatavian Sanders out of Texas. I think he's going to be a second-round pick, 6'4", 243, 20.8 years old as of February 1st. Young prospect. He is someone that just simply gets open. He's a quarterback's best friend. He didn't have any drops this past season. He's got good production, good speed, good hands. He might not be quite as big as you'd like from a tight end perspective. Same issue that we had with Brock Bowers. We'll have to see where the official numbers come out on his size. And he's not the best blocking tight end, so we'll see how that might impact where a team would draft him. But again, this is a receiving threat at the tight end position. 45 catches, 682 yards this past season. Somebody that I'll be happy to land in the mid to late second round of rookie drafts. Next up, I got Braylon Allen at number 18, running back out of Wisconsin. Projected third round draft capital, 6'2", 245 pounds. And the best thing about him is that he just turned 20 years old. So we're talking about a very young prospect. Great speed for somebody his size. I mean, 6'2", 245. Sorry, I might have mixed that up with Jatavian Sanders. 6'2", 245 pounds. And somebody with his speed, I mean, he's projected to be 4'4" or better at the combine. And that's something that, somebody that big at 245, you can't teach that. He kind of is a fast A.J. Dillon almost. He does have a bit more pass-catching ability. He's got better vision. This is a guy that, wasn't as impressive in 2023 as he was the prior years. Ball security is a big concern for me. He had 4 fumbles last year, and he had 9 in his 3 years at Wisconsin. So that's something that I'm a little bit worried about, because if you can't hold on to the ball, you're not going to be getting the ball at the NFL level. But really good prospect. He had almost 1,000 yards, 12 touchdowns this past season. Somebody I'm anxious to see at the Combine. At number 19, I have Blake Corum, running back out of Michigan. I'm projecting him to probably be a third-round pick. Could be in the second round, though. We'll have to see. I think his projections are a bit all over the place. Some have him as the number one running back in the class. Incredible college player. Loved watching him at Michigan. Very productive. And despite being only 5'8", he does have pretty good size at 213, but he is 23 years old. He's got very good vision and balance. Protects the ball well. He's a touchdown machine. He had 27 touchdowns, setting the Michigan record this past season. So he's going to come in and be a good goal line back for an NFL team. He had over 1,200 yards. A lot of carries, though. He did have a pretty big workload in college. This past season, he had 258 carries. He did have 100 yards receiving and 16 receptions, so he can catch the ball. It's not that he can't. But Michigan had Donovan Edwards, who was really more of their pass-catching running back. So, not somebody that has a big-time receiving profile. One thing with Blake Corum this year, I think coming off of a pretty severe knee injury, it was very clear that he was not as explosive as he was in 2022. He didn't break as many tackles. It wasn't, just somebody that he didn't run the same way as he did as the year before. But I think we started to see at the end of the season, especially in the college football playoff and in the last game of the regular season against Ohio State, he really started to look more like his old self with some of those big-time runs against Ohio State, Bama, Washington. So starting to come back around, really good player. I think a lot of it just depends on the draft capital with Blake Corum. At number 20, we're going to go back to the wide receivers. A.D. Mitchell out of Texas, projected second-round pick, 6'4", 196 pounds, 22 years old. Good size, great speed, good hands, pretty solid route runner as well, but he does lack some production really at the college level, and he can disappear a little bit at times. 55 catches for 845 yards and 11 touchdowns, only 1.72 yards per route run, and a 74.1 receiving grade from PFF. He had Xavier Worthy, so there was some pretty good competition there, but not someone that I'm super excited about yet at this point. But certainly he does, flash some potential, and he could be somebody that sneaks into the first round, which, if he does, that dramatically changes his outlook. I would be moving him up in my rankings, probably to that, 1-2 turn range, should he go late first, early second. So we'll see where he ends up. Not somebody that I'm super excited about at this point, though, because of that lack of production. Number 21, we're going to go with the running back Audric Estime from Notre Dame. Projected third or fourth round pick, 5'11", 227 pounds. He is only 20 years old, which again is an age that we're really excited about as a running back prospect. He's got great size. He's a big power back, touchdown machine, 18 touchdowns. This is somebody that I'm not sure is going to be a 3-down back in the NFL, but certainly will be an early down back, a power goal line guy. He's going to have a role, not necessarily a big receiving threat, and he's not the fastest guy, but he had 1,300 yards to go with those 18 touchdowns. He did have 17 receptions for 142 yards, 94 PFF rushing grades. So this is a very, very productive running back that I see having a role somewhere in the NFL. At 22, I have Bucky Irving from Oregon, another guy in that third, fourth round range, 5'10", 195. He's 21 years old. So again, pretty solid age, not quite as good as some of the others like Estime and Braylon Allen, but really good college player. And what really makes him stand out is his receiving ability. He is a big-time pass catcher, 56 receptions, 413 yards this past season. He also ran for over 1,100 yards and 11 touchdowns. Very, very talented running back prospect coming out of Oregon, 91.6 rushing grade. And the only thing really that worries me about Bucky Irving is his size. 195 pounds is pretty light for an NFL running back. We haven't seen a ton of guys succeed that are sub 200 pounds. Jahmyr Gibbs being a big exception this past year, along with Devon Achane, but it's just one of those things. I've had a hard time coming around to those smaller, lighter guys. He doesn't have the speed that Jahmyr Gibbs has, so I think that's why he's more of a third, fourth round prospect instead of a first, second round prospect, because he doesn't have 4.2, 4.3 speed. So we'll see how he tests, but this is somebody that at a minimum is going to have a role as a pass catching, third down, change of pace running back in the NFL, and that can have a lot of value in today's league. 23, Jalen Polk, wide receiver out of Washington. He's second, third round projected draft capital for him at this point. 6'2", 204 pounds, 21.8 years old. He's got a good size speed combo, great hands and ball skills, but he does struggle a bit versus more physical defenders. He had a later breakout. He transferred over to Washington, and he disappeared for 2 games late in this season. So he isn't. He was in a talented receiver room, Jalen McMillan and Rome Odunze, and he had a pretty productive year still, 69 catches for 1,159 yards, 9 touchdowns. But he's not my favorite prospect, but he is somebody that very good college receiver, I think, has some potential at the NFL level, particularly in the slot. And he's somebody that if he does get drafted in the second round, you're going to have to pay attention to. And to get a second round receiver at the back end of the second round, I think is great value in your rookie draft. And coming in at number 24, we've got a bit of a surprise, a late riser for me, not somebody that I had in here initially when I did these rankings, but I'm going to go with Roman Wilson, wide receiver from Michigan. Projected third or fourth round draft capital. At the Senior Bowl, he came in at 5'10", 186, which is smaller than he was listed at Michigan. So that could impact his draft value a little bit, coming in at only 5'10" instead of 6 foot. But this is a guy, he is a senior, 22.6 years old, so a little bit older of a prospect, but he's got great hands. He's a really explosive receiver. He had a very, very good Senior Bowl. Pretty much anyone that was at the Senior Bowl, he was pretty much the consensus number 1 wide receiver there. And so he's somebody that I think rose up draft boards a bit. He's a big-time red zone threat, even though he is more of a smaller slot guy. But he had 12 touchdowns this year and only 48 receptions, 789 yards. He was J.J. McCarthy's number 1 target, most trusted receiver. He's somebody that's going to come in and be a starting slot receiver on day 1. A good number 3 NFL receiver that, could have some flex value for you in Dynasty where you're probably having a deeper starting roster. So, and he can play outside too. This isn't a slot-only player. I think he's going to end up mostly in the slot in the pros, but just a good, solid wide receiver that if you're looking for somebody to have some potential value for more than just a year or two, we see a lot of these guys that are, more boom bust go at this 2-3 turn and they flame out rather quickly. But Roman Wilson is somebody that I think can hang around as a solid depth piece that could even flash as, a potential wide receiver 3 in fantasy football if he ends up in the right situation. So not somebody that's going to have as high of a ceiling as some of these other prospects, but again, somebody to keep an eye on. I'm going to give you one more name here at number 25 just before wrapping up, and that's Devontae Walker from North Carolina. I have him slotted in at number 25. Potential second or third round pick, 6'2", 200 pounds. Like Roman Wilson, comes in at 22.6. He's got good speed and ball tracking ability. He's a pretty good vertical separator. But again, this is an older prospect. He's not a great route runner. Not really a big yards after catch guy or a contested catch guy. So it's really something where, it's that you're relying on that speed and vertical separation. He's probably going to be a primary deep threat in the NFL. Transferred from Kent State. Didn't, sat out a few games because of the NCAA being the NCAA. 41 catches, 699 yards, and 7 touchdowns. Only a 68.3 PFF grade and a 2.28 yards per route run. Where if you're looking at a guy like Roman Wilson, who I have a spot above, 84.5 PFF grade and a 2.68 yards per route run. So That's why I have Roman Wilson. I bumped him ahead of Walker at this stage just because I think he's a more polished prospect. But Walker does have some potential, so we'll slot him in at number 25. And that does it for the first 2 rounds, plus 1 of my top 24 rankings. A couple guys to keep an eye on throughout the process, particularly as we approach the Combine at the end of February. Ladd McConkey has been a pretty popular second-round pick in mock drafts. I don't love his production, but he is somebody that if he is drafted that high is somebody that's going to move up in these rankings. Xavier Legette had a big final season, but there's some concerns there out of South Carolina. But again, somebody who's could go in the second or third round. We'll see how things work out. Johnny Wilson, a big wide receiver, potential tight end from Florida State. Malachi Corley, wide receiver who thrives on manufactured touches, but is a shifty guy from Western Kentucky. Cade Stover, probably the tight end 3 in this class out of Ohio State. Marshawn Lloyd at running back. Will Shipley at running back. Those are 2 guys, USC and Clemson, to keep an eye on as well that could get some 3rd, 4th round draft capital. And then Brendan Rice, wide receiver at a USC as well. Caleb Williams is top target. We'll see where he ends up. I'm not sure how high he could move up, but again, we're talking 3rd round picks, and there's some depth in this class. It's a pretty deep draft class overall, and there's some potential to find some gems as we go throughout the off season. So there you have it. Thank you for listening in. I really appreciate it. A bit longer than I anticipated here in this first episode, but again, I wanted to give you a good in-depth breakdown as much as I could of these top NFL rookie prospects as we get into draft season. So again, this is very, very early. We're going to update this as we go. We'll probably have another episode after the Combine where we see how things changed, see what kind of movement there is. And as we go through, we'll do some mock drafts based on real mock drafts to give some of these players landing spots to see how things would play out and see how it feels taking guys at certain spots depending on the projected landing spot. So with that, I want to thank you all. Thank you all again for tuning in. My name is Andrew Valancourt. This is the Dynasty War Room Podcast, and I really appreciate you guys tuning in, and we'll talk to you next week.